life, and I won't look back ever again.
You ain't see me activated. You better hope that you never see me agitated. I think about my actions, plan them out, evaluated. That's how I end up on the top, man, I'm calculated. My mind's a weapon, my body is the engine. I'm never second guessing, I just do what I was destined. Cause I feel I got the blessing, persistence and obsession. That's how you keep progressing, I already learned that lesson, yeah.
I'm changing who I am, I'm making a new plan, rearranging my life, and I won't look back ever again. You can't stop what's moving, you can't stop what's moving. I'm changing my life, and I won't look back ever again.
No fear, see clear, you deserve to be great. I know it feels like things get in your way. Push through those walls and the others will fall. Sit up, stand tall, you can get through it all. I need some energy, anxiety's no friend to me. I have a short memory, I don't really remember things. That's how I move on, that's how I stay strong. A new day's on, I'll keep moving right along. And I feel like the pain in the past, it needs to stay in the past. You gotta take off the cast. I wanna feel like I'm a new person. I wanna have clear vision and purpose. And I feel like the pain shouldn't last. If you can move on and past the things that make you feel bad, and you can change in your brain, I'm certain. I've done it before, and man, I'm not perfect.
I'm changing who I am, I'm making a new plan, rearranging my life, and I won't look back ever again. You can't stop what's moving, you can't stop what's moving. I'm changing my life, and I won't look back ever again.
Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 yo, go, go, go. Hustle hard, hustle every single day. I'll be making moves till I'm buried in my grave. To the system, I don't wanna be a slave. I've been doing shit my way, or the highway. And in the driveway is a nice range. Cause I grind through the climb, I invite pain. You'll never hear me, bitch, nah, I don't complain. Just gotta flip the switch and you can go and obtain anything you want, anything you need. Your mind's got the key ingredient, it's belief. They'll deceive with the negativity, but I just slide right by that energy. Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 go. You got a mind, but even that could change. You could flip the gray matter like some batter in your brain. That's why I say, fake it till you make it A. And if you play that game, then you just might make a change. Rearrange all the bad to okay. Take the worst thoughts saying, turn them to a game. Take the best thoughts saying, put them on display. On repeat in your brain till you're feeling no more pain. Never slow yourself down, you can do some more. Push past all the pain and you'll find a door. Open it up and finally explore everything that you thought you could never do before. And even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 go. Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go.
So, welcome to Philosophy and the Science of Human Nature. It's nice to see so many of you here today. I hope to see more of you here again on Thursday. And my goal today is to try to give you a sense of what kind of course this is going to be so that you can make an informed decision about whether this is a course that you actually want to enroll in for credit. With that aim in mind, there are three things I want to do in today's lecture. In the first part of the lecture, I'm just going to give you a very broad overview of what kind of course this is and to say a few words about what my goals are for the course. In the bulk of the lecture, what I'm going to do is to run through three examples of the kinds of topics that we're going to be addressing this semester so that you have a sense of what kind of material we're going to be talking about. And in the final section of the course, I'll say a few things about what it is that makes this course distinctive and a few things about the course's requirements. So the course has this perplexing cross-listed title. It's called Philosophy and the Science of Human Nature, and it's listed both in philosophy and in cognitive science, and it's a course for which you can get credit in the psychology major. So what kind of course is this? Well, in some ways, this is a course like Directed Studies Philosophy or Philosophy 125, 126. That is, we're going to be reading works by Plato, by Aristotle, by Epictetus, by Boethius, by Hobbes, by Hume, and by Mill, all major philosophers from the Western philosophical tradition. And we're going to be reading them roughly historically, with an attempt to get at some of the kinds of questions that one would get at in a traditional philosophy course. In addition, you'll get some of the material that you would get in an ethics course. So one of the topics that we'll cover in Philosophy and the Science of Human Nature are the three main ethical theories in the Western philosophical tradition. We'll talk about utilitarianism, we'll talk about deontology, and we'll talk about virtue ethics, and we'll talk about how those relate to one another. You'll also get some of the material that you would get if you took an Introduction to Political Philosophy course. We'll very briefly look at the work of Thomas Hobbes on the legitimacy of the state, and then we'll read and think about the debate between John Rawls and Robert Nozick about how much weight should be given to the relative values of equality on the one hand and liberty on the other. So in that regard, this is in some ways a standard philosophy course in the moral and political tradition. It's not a course in metaphysics, it's not a course in epistemology, it's not a course where we're going to be talking about issues like free will or the mind-body problem, all of which could legitimately fall under the topic of philosophy of human nature. But what's distinctive about this course is that in addition to the contributions that are made by the philosophical side of the equation, we're also going to be drawing from a number of other disciplines. So one of the main themes of the course will be to think about how the questions raised by the traditional philosophers that I've mentioned already are picked up in the contemporary cognitive science tradition. In particular, how they're picked up by what I see as one of the main strands in contemporary cognitive science, the strand that looks at the relation between human beings as rational creatures capable of a certain kind of calculated and reflective understanding of themselves and their place in the world, and on the other hand, human beings as evolved animals who are subject to forces that lie beyond their rational control. In light of that recognition that human beings are capable of being affected in multiple ways, we'll look at a number of writings from psychology. So we'll read some Freud, we'll have a discussion of cognitive behavioral therapy, we'll talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, we'll have a discussion of happiness using a wonderful book written by a Yale alumnus, Jonathan Haidt. We'll look at some work on self-regulation, on love and friendship, and we'll also look at empirical work on topics like moral reasoning and punishment, and social psychological work on situations and attitudes. So a lot of the material that we'll address in this course will come from psychology. But some of it will also come from the tradition of political science. So in the course of discussing the legitimacy of the state, we'll introduce ourselves to the notion of the prisoner's dilemma. We'll talk about the tragedy of the commons. And in the closing section of the course, we'll talk about the role of rhetoric and argument in political persuasion. We'll also draw from the field of behavioral economics. One of the reading assignments is to listen to Daniel Kahneman's Nobel Prize speech, accepting the Nobel Prize on behalf of himself and his collaborator Amos Tversky for the extraordinary work they did founding behavioral economics. We'll also look at some additional work in the dual processing tradition and read some excerpts from Dan Ariely's delightful public book on behavioral economics. Finally, we'll even draw a little bit from literature. We're going to read a short excerpt from the Iliad. We're going to read a short story by Ursula Le Guin. And in the second to last lecture of the course, we'll look at what Plato has to say about the role of literature and artistic representation in affecting humans' self-understanding. So what I'm going to try to do in the course is to bring together these 8 fields in a way that provides a coherent story about what kind of thing human beings are and how we can learn about what kind of things human beings are from these various perspectives. In slogan form, the structure of the course is dead guy on Tuesday, cog sci on Thursday, except not all the philosophers we're reading are dead, and not all of them are guys, and not all the other fields are cog sci, and in fact, most things are going to be covered together on Tuesday and Thursday, and there are going to be sections. But other than that, the slogan works. So that's an overview of the kinds of disciplines that contribute to the course. Let me say a bit about the specific topics that I hope to address in the course of the semester. So the first overarching topic, and I've roughly organized the syllabus under these 3 topics, but in some ways, each of them will keep re-emerging throughout the semester. The first topic is the topic of happiness and flourishing. What does the ancient Western philosophical tradition say about what it takes for human beings to thrive in a meaningful sense? And how does that connect to work that's been done more recently in various literary and scientific traditions about what it is that enables human beings to flourish? What is it about human nature that can give us some clue about what kind of thing authentic happiness might be? That's the first set of questions that we'll address. It turns out that the ancient philosophers' answer to that question is that human beings thrive when their souls are well ordered, to use the ancient metaphor. When the parts of their souls that might pull in different directions are in a certain kind of harmony. And the ancient picture is that when that happens, human beings behave in a moral way. And so the second part of the course will look at both what it feels like from the inside to behave in ways that are conventionally considered moral, and from a higher level, what it is that we mean when we say that an act is moral or immoral. So as I mentioned, we'll look at the 3 main Western philosophical conceptions of morality, and we'll also look at some interesting related questions, like why is punishment justified when it is? And is the justification for punishment psychological or ethical? And in the final unit of the course, we'll move beyond the individual into society as a whole and ask some questions about what it is that makes political structures legitimate and how it is that states or civic institutions ought to be organized in order to allow human beings to flourish. So those are the 3 main topics that we'll be addressing, and as you can see on the syllabus that I've handed out, there are highlighted examples of a few of the particular topics we're addressing on page 1 of the syllabus, and a much more detailed set of questions on pages 3, and 4. But in addition to being about the content of these questions, this is also a course that's going to encourage you to think about the methodology of each of the disciplines from which we're drawing. So it's my goal to introduce you to a number of traditional philosophical discussions of the human condition, but it's also my goal to get you to think about what these philosophical discussions have in common and why it is that thinking about things in the way that philosophy thinks about things can be valuable for answering questions that we care about. And we'll do something very similar with respect to the other disciplines. We'll look at the literature from psychology and behavioral economics and political science and literature, and we'll ask, what is it about this distinctive approach to answering these questions that provides us with a complementary insight on the issues that the philosophers have raised? And finally, I'm going to ask you to think not only in the context of this class, but in the context of the other classes you're taking, about the ways in which the material to which you're being exposed sheds light through multiple disciplinary perspectives on the set of questions that we're concerned with. So that's the opening segment of the lecture. That's what I had called the overview and course topics section of the class. And what I want to do now is to give you 3 examples of the kinds of topics that we'll be addressing this semester. So the first example I'm going to give is actually drawn from the reading that we'll be doing for Thursday. And it's a story from Plato's Republic called The Story of the Ring of Gyges. I'll give you a bit more background on Thursday about where this story fits in the context of the book from which it's drawn. But for now, all you need to know is that there's a character named Glaucon, who's actually one of the brothers of Plato, the author of this dialogue. And Glaucon is in conversation with the great ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. And he's trying to convince Socrates that when people act morally, the only reason they do it is because they can't get away with it. So even if you've shopped only for today, you'll have a chance to hear some Plato. So I'm going to read aloud to you. These numbers on the right, I'll explain to you next class, are called Stephanus numbers. They enable you, whichever translation of Plato you're using, to find the same passage. And what I'm reading to you from is from Stephanus pages 359 to 360. So, there was once a shepherd named Gyges in the service of the ruler of Lydia. There was a giant thunderstorm, and an earthquake broke open the ground and created a chasm at the place where he was tending his sheep. Seeing this, he was filled with amazement and went down into it. And there he saw a hollow bronze horse. There were window-like openings in it, and peeping in, he saw a corpse wearing nothing but a gold ring on his finger. So he took the ring and came out of the chasm. He wore the ring at his usual monthly meeting that reported to the king on the state of the flocks. And as he was sitting among the others, he happened to turn the setting of the ring towards himself to the inside of the hand. And when he did this, he became invisible to those sitting near him, and they went on talking as if he had gone. He wondered about this, and fingering the ring, he turned the setting outwards again and became visible. So he experimented with the ring to test whether it indeed had this power, and it did. If he turned the setting inward, he became invisible, and if he turned it outward, he became visible again. When he realized this, he arranged to become one of the messengers sent to report to the king. And when he arrived there, he seduced the king's wife. With her help, attacked and killed the king, and took over the kingdom. So that's the story of the Ring of Gyges. Now, why is it that Glaucon tells that story? Glaucon tells that story with the expectation that you,
That
upon hearing it, will think that you would act as Gyges did
yeah, they
if
probably
you
know
had the
they're fucking nuts,
opportunity to get
right?
away with
Yeah,
crimes without being caught. Glaucon's conclusion from this story is that those who practice justice, those who act in conformity with the moral code of their society, do so because they lack the power to do injustice. They act in that way because they fear the punishment of society. They don't act in that way because it's in any way valuable to them. And the reading that we're going to do for this
so
Thursday's
morality
class
is
includes
subjective.
both the text that surrounds the story that I just told you, so the setup wherein Glaucon raises the challenge, of which this is supposed to be an example, and the conversation between Glaucon and Socrates that follows the posing of the challenge through this story. And in addition, we're going to read some empirical psychological work on the question of what people do when they think they are unobserved. So we're going to ask the question whether, as a matter of fact, people would, and whether, as a matter of fact, people should behave as Gyges did. So that's the
Yes,
first
Gyges did.
example of the kind of topic we're going to address in the
The
course.
ring of power.
A second
Illusion.
set of topics that we'll address in the course will take
Actually
off
pretty
from
ingenious
a
the
particular
way
philosophical example that has
Tolkien
become quite popular
that idea
in
and-
contemporary discussions of morality, but which is actually traceable about 40 years
Wow.
old to some writings by Philippa Foot and the philosopher Judith Thomson. And the case with which I suspect some of you are familiar involves a trolley which is hurtling down a track in the direction of 5 people.
Okay, can you guys hear me? What the fuck just happened? Dude, our money is fuck. Our money is fucking retard. Holy shit. Why is Geo like this? Is this because I pay them less money? It's not even that big of a deal. Just install Airtel. I have to pay $100 extra, I guess. $100 more, it's not bad. This internet is fucking god. I think
How many clickers
a bit,
that in is if the trolley about 40 years in contemporary discussions of morality,
Trolley
but which
problem.
is actually traceable about 40 years old to some writings by Philippa Foot and the philosopher Judith Thomson. And the case with which I suspect some of you are familiar involves a trolley which is hurtling down a track in the direction of 5 people, and if the trolley is not turned, it will hit this group of 5. Now, the question that philosophers like to pose is the following. Suppose that there were a switch which you could use that would divert the trolley so that instead of hitting the 5 people, it would go down
They
a
speak so
branch
slow.
track
What the
and
fuck?
hit
I'm gonna
one.
die before she finishes
When
this.
we have our course
this
clickers,
fucking
we'll be
lecture.
able to do this
What the
scientifically. For
fuck?
now, I just want a show of hands. How many people think it is either morally permitted or morally required, that is either permitted or required, not forbidden, to switch the trolley in such a way that it hits the 1 person rather than the 5? How many of you think it's either permitted or required to switch the trolley so
Just
that
give
1
yourselves-
person dies rather than
Don't be
5?
mad.
Okay, and how many of you think it's morally forbidden to turn the trolley so that it kills 1 person rather than 5? How many of you think
Anyone
it's
who
morally
cannot
forbidden
follow,
or
just
prohibited? Okay, so as I said, we don't have the clickers,
link
but
is in
a
the
vast
description.
majority of
What
the
the
class believe that it's either
Who am I
permitted or
talking
required
about?
to divert
What
the
the
trolley.
fuck?
Now, suppose we had a slightly different situation. Instead of the 1 person being on the track, there is rather a bridge that rests over the trolley track, and atop the bridge, a large gentleman of ample girth, such that were you to dislodge him from
Why?
his present
Why?
location using the same
Get the
switch
fuck out.
that you used in the
Okay.
last case,
Okay, I
he
need to
would
turn
be
it off.
sufficiently weighty to
Agreed.
prevent the trolley from hitting the 5.
Anyone?
How many of you think
Anyone
it is
having problems?
morally required or morally
Deal with
permitted
it. I'm
to
not.
push the fat man off the bridge
I'm
to
not
prevent the
looking
trolley
at this
from
ugly
hitting
ass
the 5?
pop-up. Fuck off, please, please. I can't.
And
I
how many of
can't.
you think
What
it
the
is
fuck?
morally prohibited?
Oh my god.
Track, and atop the bridge, a large gentleman of ample girth, such that, were you to dislodge him from his present location using the same switch that you used in the last case, he would be sufficiently weighty to prevent the trolley from hitting the 5. How many of you think it is morally required or morally permitted to push the fat man off the bridge to prevent the trolley from hitting the 5?
Me.
And how many of you think it is
Truly.
morally prohibited?
I'm not even kidding. What the fuck?
Hands up again. All right, we have a very, very different spread this time. Now suppose we end up at the hospital.
Holy shit.
And the 5 who were lying on the track so the trolley didn't hit them are terribly injured in such a way that one needs a heart, one needs a lung, one needs a leg, one needs an arm, one needs an eye. And in walks a healthy gentleman with exactly the organs required to save the 5. How many of you think it is morally required or morally permitted to cut up the one to save the 5?
Are you fucking it?
I'll
lose my medical license.
Those 3 hands. How many of you think it is morally prohibited? All right. Suppose there is a bear running towards you. You're standing in a line of people and there's a bear running towards you. How many of you think it's morally permitted to move out of the bear's way if the bear is running towards you?
Okay.
Okay.
I think, yeah, the ring of Gaijis. So if there was no authority, would I be okay with the organ transplant? Depends on the context, I guess. If we have similar people, like 5 30-year-old men and one guy, 30-year-old, exactly the same, then that's not a problem. But once you add disabilities, once you add disabilities, gender, race, what the fuck, becomes a different conversation. Yeah. I don't give a fuck. I wouldn't do it. No, would I? Oh, fuck it. Depends. It depends on how I feel at that moment. But yeah, authority would be the only thing that stops me from doing that. Okay.
Now when that happens, the bear's going to eat the guy who was right behind you. Okay, case number 2. Suppose there's a bear running towards you. How many of you think it is morally required or morally permitted to cut up the one to save the 5? I won't sit with you in the hospital waiting room, those 3 hands. How many of you think it is morally prohibited? All right.
Dude, you
Suppose
cannot
there is
trust
a
a
bear running
that chooses between one life and the other. That's why we have medical boards. Authority does not lie with doctor. Okay, whatever.
towards you. You're standing in a line of people and there's a bear running towards you. How many of you think it's morally permitted to move out of the bear's way if the bear is running towards you? Okay. Now when that happens, the bear's going to eat the guy who's right behind you.
What the fuck?
Okay, case number 2.
It's not a train.
Suppose there's a bear running towards you. How many of you think it's morally permitted to reach behind you and take that guy and put him in front of you to shield you from the bear? Very different distribution.
Actual solution.
Okay,
If you move out of the way, the
in the
bear will
original
chase
switch
you and
case
kill
where we
you.
turn the trolley, one person's going to die if we turn the trolley and 5 are going to live. In the push the fat man case, if we push the fat man, one person's going to die and 5 people are going to live.
Yes.
In the patient in the hospital case, if we bring him into the hospital and cut him up, one person's going to die and 5 people are going to live. In the bear case, when you duck and he gets the guy behind you dies and you live. In the
Okay. Turn trolley, push fat man, divide patient, duck from bear, shield from bear. Divide from patient is very different from the rest of them, because only a doctor or a nurse can do that, right? Yeah, normal people can do the other 4, but only a doctor or a surgeon can divide a patient into 5. A patient's organ, sorry, divide a patient. Holy shit. So I, I guess it, I guess morality comes from what? From what? I guess a doctor is somehow considered different from a normal person. Yeah, because a doctor is okay. If we add a lawyer here and be like, okay, let's say you have 6 clients. Okay, 5 of them are going to get incarcerated, and if you can just pile it on one fall guy, sorry. Yeah, yeah, it's efficient, but it, it it defies the concept of that having that job. Yeah, yeah. The individual is highly specified. The person who is taking the action is a doctor and a lawyer. That's why it's, yeah. So even then, it's like applying morality because of authority. Mm, yeah, mm, morality does not exist. Yeah, maybe naturally. Who knows?
bear case, where you take the guy behind you, put him in front of you and use him as a shield, the guy behind you dies and you live. So the second set of topics that I want to let you know we'll be talking about is the following. What is it that explains the differences in our reactions to these cases? Is there genuinely a morally relevant difference between diverting the trolley so that it kills the 1 rather than the 5, and pushing the fat man so that the trolley kills the 1 rather than the 5? Or is the difference in our reaction to those 2 cases merely?
I guess because of the job, we would hold a doctor to a higher standard than some random trolley turner or a fat man pusher or a ducker or a shielder. You're a surgeon. You cannot. Yeah, it's fundamentally violating trust because the job is you. Yeah, I guess because you're identified as a doctor. Yeah.
Psychological. Is there really a moral difference between ducking in such a way that a harm that was heading towards you hits somebody else instead, and shielding so that a harm that is heading towards you is visited upon someone else instead? What is it that explains the differences in our reactions in these cases? What moral implications does that have? and what psychological implications does that have? So that's the second set of examples that I want to give you of a topic that we'll be addressing. Third set of examples. Imagine some of you are familiar with the following situation. You go to the library intending, sincerely, to read the Plato that has been assigned to you for the next lecture, and you find yourself instead answering email. Or you set for yourself a dietary regimen according to which you will eat large amounts of fruits and vegetables, and instead you find yourself tempted by cake. Or you commit yourself to saving up money for some sort of long-term goal, and instead find yourself distracted by the prospect of March break in Jamaica with your roommates, or an iPod Touch, or a new PlayStation 2 device that you can use to distract yourself from your reading. So what is it about human beings that we can form these sorts of plans and then not act on them? And what is it that we can do to make ourselves stick to commitments that we've made in moments of reflection? So the reading that I assigned to you for today, it's a very, very brief chapter from Dan Ariely's popular book. It's a chapter on procrastination. And in it, he describes a number of strategies that we can use to help ourselves stick to long-term commitments. So for example, one of the things that people do if they want to get themselves to read is that they go to the library and they surround themselves by other people who are reading. If you are in a social setting where other people are conforming to a standard that you have set for yourself to conform to, you may find yourself conforming to that standard and not doing that which you will ultimately regret. If you find yourself incredibly tempted by food that you have prohibited to yourself, it may be helpful to limit your access to it. In the chapter that we read, Dan Ariely describes an example of what he calls the ICE credit card solution, where if you have a tendency to make impulse purchases on the internet, you take your credit card and you put it in a glass of water, which you put into the freezer. And then, if you want to buy something, you remove the credit card from the freezer. And if, when the water has melted, you still want to buy it, then go ahead. So restricting our...
Get a debit card. Don't get a credit card. Credit cards are scams.
Immediate access to items that are tempting is a way of getting around the problem. A third way of getting around these sorts of problems involves automatizing the behavior that you wish to encourage. So if I set up a system on my credit card where every time I spend $10, an additional $10 goes into my savings account, it will turn out that rather than spending my money on that which I regret, I will save the money for that to which I'm committed. So the philosophical and psychological question that this part of the course raises is the following. What sort of beings are there that are capable simultaneously of planning reflectively and of not acting on the basis of their plans? It looks an awful lot like exactly the sort of people that we were getting information about in our previous two examples. They're the kind of beings who have a reflective self, which is capable of reason and commitment, and also aspects of their selves that respond non-reflectively to features in the environment. So given that, what sorts of strategies are available to help these kinds of beings stick to their reflectively endorsed plans? Well, the basic answer is that there's two kinds of strategies. One kind of strategy involves increasing the relative utility of the reflective commitment, that is, making it more salient to you in whatever kind of way that reading and broccoli and piggy banks are valuable. And the other sort of strategy involves reducing the appeal of the temporarily tempting strategy, reducing access to email, reducing access to the food, making it harder to take the trip. So one of the things that we'll talk about in the context of the course, both in small ways and in large ways, is this fulcrum point of procrastination as a way of understanding a large number of social structures. Laws, moral codes, punishments, strategies for self-regulation. All of these are aspects of society that play off of the two fundamental strategies just described. They play off of how it is that either we make certain things that we reflectively endorse more valuable, or how we make certain things that we wish not to pursue less accessible. So that's the third example of the kind of topic that we'll be talking about. But there's two kinds of strategies. One kind of strategy involves increasing the relative utility of the reflective commitment, that is, making it more salient to you in whatever kind of way that reading and broccoli and piggy banks are valuable. And the other sort of strategy involves reducing the appeal of the temporarily reducing access to the food. One of the things that we'll talk about in the context of the course, both in small ways and in large ways, is this fulcrum point of procrastination as a way of understanding a large number of social structures. Laws, moral codes, punishments, strategies for self-regulation. All of these are aspects of society that play off of the two fundamental strategies just described. They play off of how it is that either we make certain things that we reflectively endorse more valuable, or how we make certain things that we wish not to pursue less accessible. So that's the third example of the kind of topic that we'll be talking about this semester. So what I want to do in the final few minutes of the course is to say a little bit about some distinctive features of the class. So the first thing, as some of you may have noticed, is that very inconspicuously in the back of our room is a videographer. And the videographer in the back of our room is here because this class is being videotaped for the Open Yale Courses Network. That means that there is a chance that your voice will be captured on audio tape. And if that happens, we'll need to obtain your permission to reproduce your voice on the iTunes University version of this class. But it's also your chance for fame and fortune, dudes. It's my hope that the fact that this course is with Open Yale Courses will be as unobtrusive as possible, but if any of you has any concerns about it, please feel free to be in touch. The second, and I think more important thing that's distinctive about this course is that this course is in some ways about itself. The pedagogical features of this course are designed with the fundamental insight that underlies all of the readings in mind. What I am assuming is that on reflection, all of you are committed to reading and learning and engaging with the material. And my goal is to make that as easy and exciting and interesting for you as possible. So, as you've noticed from the syllabus, those of you who've had a chance to look at it, there are almost weekly assignments in this class. But the weekly assignments are designed to make you want to engage with the material. So, for example, the very first assignment for this course, which is described on the back page of the blue handout, asks you to think about whether you want to commit yourself voluntarily to not having internet access during this class, and then to explain your decision, making reference to the work on procrastination that we read for this week. Throughout the semester,
Are you fucking serious? What?
my goal will be to make exercises that engage you in that way.
I'd rather die. Holy shit.
One of the exercises to making.
So I have to read philosophy. I have to learn actual philosophy. And I don't have any outlet to relax. No.
Reference to the commit yourself voluntarily to not having internet access during this class, and then to explain your decision, making reference to the work on procrastination that we read for this week. Throughout the semester, my goal will be to make exercises that engage you in that way. One of the exercises involves writing a review of a short story that we read from the perspective of one of the two philosophers that we've read. One of the assignments involves designing a week of a future version of this course. So though there are 10 weekly assignments, it's my hope that engaging in those assignments will keep you connected to the course. In fact, a number of the readings on the syllabus that appears before you were suggestions made by students who took the seminar version of this course in previous years. In addition, as you saw from the trolley cases, I'm going to be asking you in the context of class to think about cases and examples. And in doing that, it's been found that making use of clickers is enormously helpful to keep students engaged. So you'll notice that the second part of next week's assignment asks you, if you're enrolled in the course for credit, to pick up a clicker at the Bass Library and to register its number on the course website. So once the course gets going, starting in the middle of the second week, we'll be making use of clickers.
What's a clicker?
Finally, one of the things that makes this course distinctive is that I actually spent last year, as the Yale Daily News reports, as a full-time student. I had a grant from the Mellon Foundation that allowed
What?
Allowed me to take classes, and so I spent most of last year sitting in the back row of classrooms like this one, listening to lectures like this one, which is how I got the idea about the turning off the internet thing.
No.
But it also helped me realize that the rhythm of the semester is a complicated one. So as you'll see, the second sentence of the Yale Daily News article notes, her grades lately have been sliding a little from an excellent on the first 2 assignments to only a check mark for completion of the most recent 2. I promise I will not post your grades in the Yale Daily News. But I promise that I am, as a result of that experience, profoundly aware of the ways in which structuring assignments with enough advance notice is crucial for allowing students to succeed in the class. So I've tried to be incredibly explicit on the syllabus. And if you look at pages 4 and 5 of the syllabus, you'll see that there are 5 kinds of requirements for the course. The first and perhaps the most important requirement of the course are the set of readings that I have assigned you. And these readings come in 2 forms. Roughly half of them come from the 6 books, which I have ordered on your behalf from Labyrinth Books. All of the books are low-priced student editions. All of them are easily available in a used form. And together, even purchased new at full price, they add up to $80. So some of the assignments come either from the 3 classical works that we'll be reading, Plato, Aristotle, and Epictetus, the 2 contemporary works that we're looking at, Jonathan Haidt's Happiness Hypothesis.
www.gutenberg.org. Pirate all these books. Fuck her.
And a book by Jonathan Shea called Achilles in Vietnam. And finally, I've asked you to purchase a small $15 philosophy dictionary, which is enormously useful for looking up terms and concepts with which you might be unfamiliar. I realize, however, that some of you aren't going to have decided whether you're taking the course before this Thursday. And so even though half of Thursday's reading comes from this book, I have put up the relevant pages on our class's V2 server. So you can do the reading for Thursday, even if you haven't purchased the book. So roughly half the readings come from those books, roughly half the readings come from articles, and all of those readings are available on the V2 server for next class. But in addition to choosing books that I think are accessible and interesting, I've also made an effort to provide you with reading guides to the books in a way that will orient you in them. So if you look at the first 3 pages of the blue handout, you will see an example of a reading guide, and not just an example of a reading guide, it's the reading guide for the reading on Thursday. And you'll see that it does 3 things. The first thing that it does is it gives you a bit of background about the author that we're reading and the text from which we're doing the reading. The second thing that it does is that it highlights the terms and concepts which I'm hoping that you will get out of the material. Notions and terms that will enable you to express thoughts that you might have had in a vocabulary that will let you be in conversation with others. And the final thing that the reading guide has are a set of questions to focus your attention as you do the reading. There's no requirement that you write out answers to these. You can use them to make notes for yourselves. You can use them in conversation with your classmates. But you will have, for every one of the required readings, this amount of guidance, and for each of the recommended and optional readings, information about the author. Second important thing about the course is lecture and sections. I really like seeing all these faces, and I really would love to see them all semester long. I promise to give you at least 1 fun slide, and probably more, per lecture. So I really hope you'll come, because where else? When I post the slides, you can't see the animation of the nice shepherd. So I will try to make lectures as engaging as possible. And likewise with sections, we will make an effort to make these settings where you can genuinely engage with the material and with one another. It has been pointed out to me that one of the section times available is Thursdays from 10:30 to 11:20, which is when the lecture meets. Obviously, that's a typographical error, and we'll be adding additional section time to make up for that. Section registration happens in the usual way.
I actually wanted to kill
There will in addition be 10 brief directed exercises. I've already said a bit to you about them, and there's information on the syllabus about what point values those have in determining your final grade. There are 2 short essays. There will be 3 assigned, and you can choose which 2 of those you write. And finally, there will be a final exam where, in keeping with the theory of the course, I will distribute every single one of the questions that may appear on the exam in advance. I will encourage you to learn that material in a focused and structured way, and the exam will consist of a proper subset of those questions which you have been given to prepare in advance. So that's an overview of what I plan to do this semester. First, of what kind of course this is. Second, 3 examples of topics that we're going to address. Third, some of the things that are distinctive about the course and some of its requirements. So what questions do you have?
None.
Yes? So the question is, are the videos for the lectures going to be posted? And the answer is the videos for the lectures take time to be edited and processed. So they will be posted, but they won't be posted during the class. I will post the slides after each lecture, but as you saw today, the slides don't give you that much information. Yes?
Also, the soul too.
Nope, everything in the course is done electronically,
Wow.
so all assignments for the course are to be submitted on the classes V2 server under assignments, and the deadline for the first written
No.
exercise is actually next Tuesday at 10 a.m., but because that's still during shopping period, that exercise will be accepted without penalty until Friday. But everything for the
Well,
class in
America
terms
is
of submission
fucking
and
wild.
return of exercises will be done online on our V2 site.
You pay six figures.
When are
in
sections going to
US
start? Sections will begin the
dollars.
third week of the semester. Yeah.
And then professors just stack up assignment.
Yes, so if you look at the sample directed exercise, which I gave you, which is on the
I
back
mean,
side of the blue sheet, so the
professors
question is, it
here-
says that directed
here
exercises
do
are 1 to
that
7%
too.
each. Will I tell you how much a directed exercise is worth? Answer yes. So if you turn over the blue sheet
But
on
I
the back, you'll
don't
see that the directed exercise
go
for next week has two
bankrupt.
parts. 1, take out a clicker. That's worth 1 point.
Holy
2,
shit.
tell me whether you're going to turn off your internet and why. 3 points. So the directed exercise will always
sorry
say,
for laughing.
here's the question, here's the point value for the question. Anything else?
Yeah, it's kind of.
We're actually at the end of time, so
It's
you all
kinda
have pieced your questions
unaffordable,
extraordinarily well. I
to
look
be
forward to
honest.
seeing you next class. So today's lecture is about the question of the challenge that
Yes.
Glaucon posed in the story of the Ring of Gyges. The question is, what sort of motivation do we have for acting morally? And what expectations should we have with respect to those around us about whether they act in that way for reasons intrinsic to moral motivation or simply because they wish to appear a particular way? So what I want to start by doing is to tell you a little bit about the extraordinary person whose dialogue, The Republic, we read excerpts from today. It's hard to overestimate the influence of Plato on the Western intellectual tradition. There is no educated person in the Western world in the last 2,500 years who wasn't influenced in some way or another by the thoughts and by the framework of understanding that Plato provided for us some 2,500 years ago. Plato was an extremely interesting figure. He was born into an aristocratic family in Athens. Some think that he was descended from one of the Athenian kings, but regardless, it's clear that the family of which he was a part were among the leaders of Athenian political society. Several of his uncles had been part of a coup in the government that took place several years before Plato came to maturity. And the expectation of people like Plato was that they would go into civic service, government, public leadership. It was as if he were a Kennedy or a Bush or a Clinton. He came from a family with a long history of political engagement, and the assumption was that he would become politically engaged himself. But interestingly, for reasons about which there are great speculations, Plato came under the influence of a man about 30 years his elder named Socrates, who, in the portraits that we have of him, looked remarkably like Plato himself. Socrates was a gadfly. He wandered around Athens and asked people to reflect on their commitments, asked people to think about what the nature of fundamental things like justice and truth and reality and friendship and love and honesty were. He asked people to reflect on common opinion and to ask themselves what.
I need a break. Let's turn some music. So I don't get tired of my break. Wow. Um. Yeah. Hmm. Why is the why is no good music free? Yeah, I'm just oh, please no garbage. No, what is this?
Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way.
Yeah,
So
it's
you can
alright.
go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make.
Yo, I got a lot of shit to say, so I'ma do this every day. I'll be writing things until I'm fucking buried in my grave. 6 feet deep under, but my body won't decay. Cause my messages
Yeah,
are
this is
timeless, so they
alright.
put them on display. Oh yeah, I rap with a certainty. I have a sense of urgency, a message for eternity, for everyone internally. I had some people burning me, but now they fucking learn to see I ain't the one to fuck with. Now they looking nervously, and I don't really care what you think of me respectfully. You can kick rocks if you think you're fucking better. See, I will outwork you, turn you to an enemy. Hurt you so bad that you're gonna need some therapy. I got the motherfucking recipe. I've been cooking up hits, I'ma leave a legacy. You'll be looking small when you're standing right next to me. I'm 5'10", bitch, but I'm 10 feet
Cause I
next
don't
to
give
me.
a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yeah, I'ma do it my way.
Yeah, the future of humanity is doomed.
Yeah, I'ma do it my way.
They can't even gamble correctly.
I can't contain it, I'm coming out with a statement. You really changed, man, all your music and
It's a shame.
arrangement. You don't know shit, shut your mouth, you can save it. I'm the same dude that got his come up from the basement. 100 songs, 100 weeks, didn't change it. Experiments, development, intelligence.
Let's
equation.
read this.
I'll do it all again, cause I never feel complacent. Let's keep the good vibes, positivity's contagious. I'm never looking back, cause I made a life that's passionate. A college graduate suppressing all his talents, yeah. He found a way to go and change, become an advocate. For taking control of your life, go out and battle. And you think you have a dream, then act on it. Get after it, get out your head and fucking capture it. You got one life to master it. Don't give up on your future, we all start losers. We're all late bloomers, gotta
I
struggle
don't
through
give
the
a fuck
sewer.
what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yeah, I'ma do it my way.
You see, I position my mic in the worst way possible. Wow. Actually, deal with it. Usually, philosophical questions like those of the sciences are usually foundational and abstract in nature. Philosophy is done primarily through reflection, does not tend to rely on experiment or the methods used. What is this garbage? Logical and logical conception between Western philosophy with arguably African philosophy as a possible third branch. This website is mainly concerning Western philosophy by branch, by historical, by individual philosophy. Yeah, let's get from these metaphysics, epistemology, ethics. Wow, a philosophical branch is a broad division 4. Study of existence and the nature of reality. Epistemology, the study of knowledge. Okay, this is meta philosophy. Metaphysics is the study. Okay, I get it. This is this epistemology. Just call it metaphys metaphilosophy. Yeah. They study ethics, the study of how people should act, what is good and valued. Who the fuck asked? Aesthetics, the study of basic philosophy questions about art and beauty, logic, political philosophy, rhetoric. In addition to the other branches concerned with philosophical questions arising from disciplines including philosophy of mind, philosophy of intelligence, philosophy of language, education, history, science. What a fucking waste of time. Yeah. Oh. Okay, let's go. Maybe a better index. Thales of Miletus. Yeah, the OG. 3 Heroes. Ancient medieval model. Pre-Socratic, Socratic, Hellenistic, Rome. Medieval Renaissance. Medieval philosophers? Ooh. Okay, whatever. Age of Reason, Age of Enlightenment, Modern. Okay. Sometimes considered Renaissance philosophy. Uh, Philosophy timeline. What the fuck is this? Oh, okay. This is kind of good. Wow, this is actually good. Okay, this website is not completely useless. Yes. It's good for it. Someone who's stupid like me. I read his books. I read his books. I read one of his books. Yeah, Beyond Good and Evil. Fucking OG. Okay. Mm. Yeah, I haven't read anything else. Where's Marx? Yeah, Hegel. Bullshit. Okay, Marx. I have read Marx. Just a little bit. I want to read Hegel. Hmm. There's so much I don't know. It's like I'm at the bottom of the iceberg. Don't know what light is like. Hmm. Okay, whatever.
What of the things that they believe. So today's lecture is about the question of the challenge that Glaucon posed in the story of the Ring of Gyges. The question is, what sort of motivation do we have for acting morally? And what expectations should we have with respect to those around us about whether they act in that way for reasons intrinsic to moral motivation or simply because they wish to appear a particular way. So what I want to start by doing is to tell you a little bit about the extraordinary person whose dialogue, The Republic, we read excerpts from today. It's hard to overestimate the influence of Plato on the Western intellectual tradition. There is no educated person in the Western world in the last 2,500 years who wasn't influenced in some way or another by the thoughts and by the framework of understanding that Plato provided for us some 2,500 years ago. Plato was an extremely interesting figure. He was born into an aristocratic family in Athens. Some think that he was descended from one of the Athenian kings, but regardless, it's clear that the family of which he was a part were among the leaders of Athenian political society. Several of his uncles had been part of a coup in the government that took place several years before Plato came to maturity. And the expectation of people like Plato was that they would go into civic service, government, public leadership. It was as if he were a Kennedy or a Bush or a Clinton. He came from a family with a long history of political engagement, and the assumption was that he would become politically engaged himself. But interestingly, for reasons about which there are great speculations, Plato came under the influence of a man about 30 years his elder named Socrates, who, in the portraits that we have of him, looked remarkably like Plato himself. Socrates was a gadfly. He wandered around Athens and asked people to reflect on their commitments, asked people to think about what the nature of fundamental things like justice and truth and reality and friendship and love and honesty were. He asked people to reflect on common opinion and to ask themselves what of the things that they believed were well-grounded and what of the things that they believed were simply matters of received opinion. And in part because of his provocation, Socrates was sentenced to death in 399 before the Common Era. When Plato was roughly 30 years old, Plato attended the death of his great teacher. And he describes the story of the trial at which Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens in an extraordinary dialogue known as the Apology. And the legacy that the Apology provides is something like the legacy that the Gospels provide for the life of Jesus. It's a story of a person.
You know, he got persecuted. And nobody gave a fuck about Diogenes, I guess. Oh, how did Diogenes die? What the fuck?
Of the trial at which Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens in an extraordinary dialogue known as the Apology. And the legacy that the Apology provides is something like the legacy that the Gospels provide for the life of Jesus. It's a story of a person willing to die for the sake of principle in a way that became a trope for Western civilization. So in an extraordinary painting, which you can see if you go to the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, there is a depiction of the death of Socrates. And here is Socrates drinking from the chalice of hemlock, which is to put him to death. Here are his disciples, including Plato, calmly at the end of the bed, and Crito holding his leg. Up the stairs here, which you can't see, are some other figures leaving. But what's extraordinary about this picture is that it was painted in 1787 by one of the artists involved in the French Revolution. It was, in fact, displayed to Thomas Jefferson, who admired it greatly. And one of the striking things about its composition is that in some ways it echoes Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting of The Last Supper, where, those of you who are familiar with the painting know, Jesus sits at the center of the table surrounded by disciples. Whereas that is a story of death for the sake of faith, Socrates' story is a story of death for the sake of reason. And the idea that a life lived on the basis of principle, recorded by disciples who can explain the motivation for that life, the idea that that can influence thousands of years of history and can inspire political change and principled commitment is one of the legacies that Plato left us. After Socrates' death, Plato devoted himself to a life of learning. And in 385 before the Common Era, started what many call the first university or academy in the Western world. At that academy, Plato trained many of the thinkers of ancient Athens, including Aristotle, whose works we'll be reading next week. While there, Plato composed a number of works that have endured. Among them is the Republic, which we read excerpts from for today. And here's a particularly beautiful 3rd century manuscript of the Republic, one of the tens of thousands of documents discovered at Oxyrhynchus in Egypt roughly a century ago. And I've put the spelling up there so that those of you who are intrigued can go and read about the story of the Oxyrhynchus papyri, which is one of the most incredible detective stories of discovery of a huge trove of documents. As I said again, only a century ago, many of them retrieved only during and after the First World War. So Plato's Republic, as I mentioned, is one of roughly 30 dialogues that Plato composed. So you might have noticed in the course of reading it, as the reading guide indicated, that it's not written as a treatise. It's written in the form of a conversation. And except for some letters that we have of Plato, nearly all of the work of his that we have comes in the form of dialogues. And they address almost every philosophical topic imaginable: the nature of knowledge, the nature of truth, the nature of love, the nature of friendship, and so on. The Republic in particular is focused on the question of how society ought to be structured to allow human beings to flourish. And the work, as we've inherited it, is structured into 10 books, of which we will read in this class excerpts from the 2nd book and most of the 10th. In the particular part that we're reading, we overhear a conversation among 3 characters. One of them is Plato's teacher Socrates, the fellow with the snub nose that I showed you the slide of earlier. And the other 2 are Plato's brothers, Glaucon and Adeimantus. And the conversation that we hear takes place first between Socrates and Glaucon, and then between Socrates and Adeimantus. But we're, of course, not reading off the Oxyrhynchus papyrus. We're not even reading, as some students at Yale are this semester, the text in the original Greek. There's a seminar being offered in my department on Plato's.
I'm my depth here, so I'm just going to shut up and try to listen. So where the fuck is chat on my screen? Get the fuck up.
Republic, a full semester during which they are reading the text in ancient Greek, and there's an extraordinary Yale-London collaboration of a decade during which 1 week each year professors from Yale and professors from London get together and read one book of Plato's Republic. So this is a book that is read seriously here. We, however, are fortunate enough to be reading an edition, which I've asked all of you to purchase, which looks like this. And I want to explain to you why I've asked you to buy a book, given that, as many of you might have noticed, the translation of the Republic, a late 19th century translation by Benjamin Jowett, is available on the internet. And I just want to say a few words about what value there is in getting editions of books which are designed to help students engage seriously with the material. So in the copy of the Republic that I've asked you to purchase, there are extensive introductory materials, there are extraordinarily helpful footnotes, there's an annotated bibliography in the prefatory material that tells you what books to look at if you're interested in Plato. There's an incredibly valuable index. And in the margins are what I've told you are called Stephanus numbers, which allow you to make reference to any other translation. So let's.
I agree with her. It's an incredibly valuable resource. Why the fuck is my mic cutting off? Okay. This pirate.
Let's now move to the substance of the material that we read for today. What is it that Glaucon, Plato's brother, is seeking to do in the course of his conversation with Socrates? There are 3 questions that Glaucon wants to answer. The first is that he wants to say something about the nature and origin of justice. How is it that people come to behave in cooperative ways? And what is it that we speak of when we talk about the norms of justice? This is a topic that we'll discuss when we get to Hobbes, and so I'm not going to say more today about the particular argument that Glaucon offers there. What I want to focus on instead are 2 things, Glaucon's second and third question. The first is Glaucon's claim that people act justly unwillingly, that the only reason people act and conform with the laws of morality is because they will gain good reputations thereby. And the second is Glaucon's claim that they are right to do so.
Yes.
So the text begins with a fundamental contrast, one that is useful not only in the context of Glaucon's discussion of justice, but one that is fundamental throughout Plato's work. And that's the contrast between the way things seem and the way things are. And it's a crucial insight to recognize that seeming and being can come apart, and that in some cases our concern is with the way things appear, and in other cases our concern is with the way things are. So the text actually begins with a challenge that Glaucon raises to Socrates. He says, do you want to seem to have persuaded us that it is better to be just than unjust, or do you want truly to have persuaded us? And clearly Socrates' goal is the latter. He wants to engage in true persuasion. This theme of seeming versus being is then taken up by Glaucon, who asks Socrates the question whether there's value in being just, or whether the value of justice comes merely from appearing to be that way. So we find a contrast in the opening pages between three kinds of value that things can have. Things can be intrinsically valuable, valuable as ends in themselves, valuable for what they are. Socrates gives the example.
Materialism holds that the only thing that can be truly proven to exist is matter. Thus, according to materialism, all things are composed of material and phenomena are the result of material interaction, with no accounting of spirit or consciousness, as well as a general concept in metaphysics. It is more specifically applied to philosophy of mind. Mind-body problem. What is this will be a bad rabbit hole. Oh my god, these dogs. What's the point of this studies the nature of the mental effects, mental functions, mental properties. Wow. Shut the neurobiology and computer science. Within philosophy, the philosophy of mind is usually considered a part of metaphysics and has been particularly studied by schools of nature of the nature of free will. Body part. Illusionary one which has arisen purely because of mental and biological vocabulary are incompatible. Okay. And such illusionary problems arise if one try describe in terms of the other's vocabulary or in the mental vocabulary. Okay. Users could but really Descartes. 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 Descartes, right? René Descartes. Descartes. No. Dualism appeals to common sense intuition of the vast majority of non-philosophically trained. The mental and physical to seem to the substance dualism, Cartesian dualism. Oh. Property dualism maintains that the mind is a group of independent properties that emerge from the brain, but that it is not a distinct substance. Thus, when matter is organized in the appropriate way, mental properties emerge. Epiphenomenalism. Oh. Okay, I give up. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck is this?
Example here of things like joy and harmless pleasures. These are things we value not because of what they provide in addition, but things that we value as ends in themselves. There are, by contrast, things that are merely instrumentally valuable, things that are valuable as means, things that are valuable in enabling us to do something else, or in seeming to be a particular way. And into this category fall things like money, which is valuable, let me remind you, but as a means to other ends. And for example, things like seeming dangerous. If what you're trying to do in an evolutionary sense or as a nation is to prevent others from attacking you, it doesn't matter whether you are dangerous. What matters is that you seem dangerous. And there are, of course, things that are valuable for both reasons. Things like, Socrates says, sight, which we value both because it enables us to do things and because it brings pleasure.
Yeah, we're back. Geo, man. 3 minutes, it says let's pour. Yeah, we are 7. Please update. Hello. Is it? Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. No, it's fluctuating. Holy shit. Back. Yeah, we're back. Yeah. Please work this. Whatever.
Pleasure in itself, or health, or learning, or knowledge. And the question which Glaucon and Socrates are disputing is into which category justice falls. Now, if we had our clickers, this would be a chance for me to re-engage all of you by asking you into which category Glaucon thinks justice falls and into which category Socrates thinks justice falls. But in our last low-tech day, I will instead ask you to raise your hands. Into which of the categories, intrinsically valuable, instrumentally valuable, or both, does Glaucon think justice falls? How many think he thinks justice is merely intrinsically valuable? How many think he thinks it's merely instrumentally valuable? And how many think he thinks it's both? By contrast, Socrates, intrinsically valuable, instrumentally valuable, both. So the dispute between them, both of them accept that there is value to seeming just, but the dispute between them is about whether
What? What was she saying?
in addition just
Shit.
sense or as a nation
Dropped
is
frames.
to prevent
Okay,
others from attacking you.
Okay.
It doesn't matter whether you are dangerous.
Stabilizer.
What matters is that you seem
stream stable.
dangerous. And there are, of course, things that are valuable for both reasons. Things like, Socrates says, sight, which we value both because it enables us to do things and because it brings pleasure in itself, or health, or learning, or knowledge. And the question which Glaucon and Socrates are disputing is into which category justice falls. Now, if we had our clickers, this would be a chance for me to re-engage all of you by asking you into which category Glaucon thinks justice falls and into which category Socrates thinks justice falls. But in our last low-tech day, I will instead ask you to raise your hands. Into which of the categories, intrinsically valuable, instrumentally valuable, or both, does Glaucon think
I'm seriously having trouble following this.
in enabling us to do something else, or in seeming to be a particular way? And into this category fall things like money, which is valuable, let me remind you, not as an end in itself, but as a means to other ends. And for example, things like seeming dangerous. If what you're trying to do in an evolutionary sense or as a nation is to prevent others from attacking you, it doesn't matter whether you are dangerous. What matters is that you seem dangerous. And there are, of course, things that are valuable for both reasons. Things like, Socrates says, sight, which we value both because it enables us to do things and because it brings pleasure in itself, or health, or learning, or knowledge. And the question which Glaucon and Socrates are disputing is into which category justice falls. Now, if we had our clickers, this would be a chance for me to re-engage all of you by asking you into which category Glaucon thinks justice falls and into which category Socrates thinks justice falls. But in our last low-tech day, I will instead ask you to raise your hands. Into which of the categories, intrinsically valuable, instrumentally valuable, or both, does Glaucon think justice falls? How many think he thinks justice is merely intrinsically valuable? How many think he thinks it's merely instrumentally valuable? And how many think he thinks it's both? By contrast, Socrates, intrinsically valuable, instrumentally valuable, both. So the dispute between them, both of them accept that there is value to seeming just, but the dispute between them is about whether, in addition, there is value to being just. Does it matter that you actually act in a just way, or does it matter only that you seem to act in a just way? Now, in order to answer this question, Glaucon, as a character in Plato's Republic, makes use of a technique that is and has become one of the fundamental techniques in philosophical thought. It's basically an application of scientific method to our ideas. If you're trying to figure out what makes a seed grow, does it require soil? Does it require water? Does it require light? Does it require air? Does it require you to sing sweetly as you walk past it? What you do is you conduct a controlled experiment. And you look and see if you have the seed with water but no soil, does it grow? If you have the seed with air but no singing, does it grow? In this way, Glaucon engages in a number of imaginative exercises to ask what people would do if just behavior were divorced from its typical consequences. So he asks us to imagine somebody who acts either in a just or an unjust way, and to think about what their motivations would be if the consequences were one of a certain kind. So in ordinary cases, if you act morally, you are perceived as acting morally. And if you act immorally, you are perceived as acting immorally. The question that he asks us to consider in the story of the Ring of Gyges, which I related last lecture, is how people would act if they were perceived identically, regardless of how it is that they genuinely behaved. If your acts of immorality were invisible to the world, if you could behave immorally and nobody would see you so that your reputation remained unscathed, how is it that you would behave? Glaucon's suggestion with the story of the Ring of Gyges is that under those circumstances, you would behave as the unjust one does. But in case you aren't convinced by that story, he tells a second story after the Ring of Gyges, which is the story of the inversion. And he says this: suppose the person who acts justly is perceived by everyone as acting unjustly, and the person who acts unjustly is perceived as acting justly. Would you continue to behave in accord with the standards of morality if the opposite reputation attached to you? Now, we can contrast this question about morality with two cases where it seems clear in the first that we value something merely instrumentally, and where it seems clear in the second that we value something both intrinsically and instrumentally. So if the act that you are engaged in is one of taking a repulsive medicine, and if under normal circumstances, when you take the medicine, you get better, and when you don't take the medicine, you stay ill, then you will presumably, if you want to get better, take the medicine. In a Gaiji scenario, where regardless of whether you take the medicine, you get better, you won't be inclined to take the medicine. And certainly in an inverted scenario, where if you take the medicine, you stay ill, and if you don't take it, you get better, you won't be inclined to take the medicine. When things are of merely instrumental value, we can read the motivation off the consequences. The question is this: is justice just like taking a medicine, something that we value because of an end that it produces, but not because of the medicine itself? Or is it more like sight? Suppose that, as is the case in normal circumstances, when you see, you have visual experience of the world, and when you engage in motor activity, you don't bump into things. Because I can see this podium, I'm able to regulate my body in such a way that I don't bump into it. In a Ring of Gaiji scenario, I wouldn't need to see to be able to avoid bumping into the podium. It seems to me clear that in that case, I would nonetheless prefer to have vision, even if I could get the consequences of seeing without having vision. And the question of what I would do in the inverted case, where I could have either sight and the ability to avoid objects, or the ability to avoid objects and not sight, is one where I don't know how to answer. So the challenge that Glaucon poses to you is the following. Is morality for you something merely like taking medicine? Do you behave morally so that you have the reputation of behaving morally? Or do you behave morally because morality, like being able to see, is something that's valuable in itself to you and valuable to you because of the consequences that it produces? That's the challenge of Plato's Republic. And in next week's class and the week after that, we'll hear some of the answers that are offered to Glaucon's challenge. What I want to move to now is the second text that we read for today, a text by the contemporary psychologist Daniel Batson, which addresses the question of moral integrity and moral hypocrisy from an empirical psychological perspective. Batson's question is this: is it the aim of people to be moral, or is it the aim of people merely to appear to be so? Batson looks somewhat unlike Plato and Socrates. He's a living man, teaches at the University of Kansas. He even has a computer printer. And in the work that we read for today, we get a description of empirical studies that Batson did on the question of how people behave when they think they are not being observed. How do they construe their actions to themselves? And what factors, if any, lead them to behave in more honest ways? So Batson presents subjects with a very simple experimental scenario. People who participate in his experiments come into his laboratory and are told that their job is to decide which of two tasks they are assigned to and which of two tasks a second person, whom they won't be meeting, will be assigned to. One of the tasks is fun and interesting, and each correct answer that you give provides you with a lottery ticket for a lottery in which you'll win a certain amount of money. And the other task is described as kind of dull, and each correct answer that you give will not result in your being entered in a lottery. So people are told you can decide to assign yourself to the fun, interesting lottery chance task and the other person to the boring no lottery task. Or you can decide to assign the other person to the fun, interesting task and yourself to the boring no lottery task. Now, what psychologists call the DV, or dependent variable, the thing with respect to which Batson is looking for differences, is the percentage of times people assign themselves to the positive task and the other person to the neutral task. So if we were just doing it by chance, if you were literally just flipping a coin, what percent of the time would the self-positive task be assigned? What percent of the time would the person assign themselves to the positive task, hold up the number of fingers times 10 such that it would be that percent of the time? You've got them on one hand, 50%. So if you were just merely flipping a coin, 50% of the time you would end up with the positive task, 50% of the time the other person would end up with the positive task. So that's one of the things that Batson is measuring in his studies. And the other thing that Batson is measuring in his studies is the point value that people assign to themselves with respect to how moral their action was. If they think their action was perfectly moral in making the assignment, then they give themselves a 9. If they think the action was perfectly immoral in making the assignment, they give themselves a 1. So those are the things that Batson is measuring. So that's psychology term number 1, dependent variable, that which you're looking to see differences among in your studies. Now, those of you who have taken psychology courses, who have had roommates who have taken psychology courses, know that when psychology studies are conducted, subjects are presented with what are called conditions. That is, when they come in, one thing happens to them or another thing happens to them. The bean that I described in the science study might be in the condition where it has soil plus water and no air, or it might be in the condition where it has soil plus singing and no water. Likewise, subjects in Batson's experiment might be in a case where they just come in and they're told there are these two possibilities. You can assign yourself positive or this other person negative, or they're told that they're in some sort of scenario where they can use chance to make the decision. Now, I asked you in the reading guide to try to understand the chart in which Batson presents his results. And what I want to do in the next few minutes of lecture is to explain to you what the extraordinarily interesting results that he came up with mean. So in the first condition, when subjects just come in and are told they can make the assignment however they want, 80% of subjects, 8 out of 10, assign themselves to the positive condition and assign the other character to the negative condition, right? So 80% of people do the selfish thing, but they don't consider themselves to have done something particularly generous. They rate themselves at 4 on a scale of 1 to 9 with respect to morality. And those who assigned the other person to the positive condition rate themselves extraordinarily highly. They think they have done the right thing. Now, if you bring subjects into a room and you tell them they can flip a coin, but they don't have to, roughly half of them don't flip the coin. And among those half, 90% of themselves assign themselves to the positive condition. No surprise there. The next number is the one that gives us the surprising result. What happens when subjects come into the room, are told that they can flip a coin, and on the basis of that coin flip, assign themselves to one condition and the other person to the other? What happens is that upon flipping the coin, 90% of them assign themselves to the positive condition. Now, we all just held up 5 fingers of one hand. So what's going on here? Well, why don't you think about what would happen if you flipped a coin and it came up heads? What does heads mean? Heads. Heads must mean I assign myself to the positive condition and I assign my opponent to the negative condition. Comes up tails. 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 That means I assign myself to the positive condition. I assign my opponent to the negative condition. But here's what's striking. 90% of the people flip the coin, assign themselves to the positive condition, and rate themselves as having acted in an extraordinarily moral way. 7 on a scale of 9 with respect to how morally they behave. And the one guy who actually did follow the coin flip gives himself a 9. All right, so Batson's worried about this, and so he says, okay, let me see whether I can control for that by actually not making the coin say heads or tails, but I'll make the coin say on one side self to positive, and I'll make it say on the other side opponent to negative. What happens in that case? What happens in that case is that 86% of the people who flip out the coin, when it says opponent to negative, do what? What would you do? You flip it again until it comes up. That's not the one that counts. The one that counts is, it must be the 14th flip that actually determines. And those people, again, rate themselves as having acted in an incredibly morally appropriate way. Even when Batson labels it with colors so that he can see through the window who is doing what, he gets the same extraordinarily astounding pattern of results. In 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 cases, people given the chance to represent to themselves that they have behaved morally will do that even if what they've really done is taken advantage of an ambiguous situation. It appears, says Batson on the basis of this, that what people care about is seeming moral to themselves and not, in fact, about acting in a way that's fair. But what can one do to induce in people pro-social moral behavior? Here's the extraordinary next study that Batson did. He puts the subjects who are engaged in the same experimental design in a room with a mirror. Now, if the mirror is facing away from the subject so that there's no reflection of them in it, you get exactly the same results as last time. Roughly 85% of people assign themselves to the positive condition. But if the mirror is facing towards them, so that the subject is facing the mirror and flips a coin, only 62% of them assign themselves to the positive condition. And, if the mirror is facing them, even when they don't flip the coin, 62% of them assign themselves to the positive condition. That is, they're behaving almost completely fairly. And if they are facing the mirror and flipping the coin, they behave 50%, exactly as chance would predict. What's going on here? It looks like the simple act of feeling as if one is observed, even when one is observed by one's self, is sufficient to provoke prosocial behavior. And an extraordinary study carried out about 5 years ago in England bears that out. So in this study, there was an honor system about putting money into a cup if you drank coffee in the department. And some weeks, taped above the cup of the coffee machine, were pictures of flowers. There's the flowers, there's the flowers, there's the flowers, there's the flowers. And those weeks, almost nobody put money into the pot. The other half of the weeks, taped above the pot, were pairs of eyes. And those weeks, subjects donated large amounts of money into the pot. There is something about us as social beings that encourages us to behave in moral ways when activated within us, consciously or unconsciously, is the sense of being observed. If you want to complete your assignments without procrastinating, put a pair of eyes on your computer and a mirror behind your desk. I kid you not. The profound and shocking insight of Glaucon's story of Gyges in Plato's Republic is, in light of this contemporary research, almost chilling. That he would tell the story of how it is that we can expect somebody to behave if he conceives of himself as unobserved, the story of our shepherd who finds the ring of invisibility and when he gets it, takes over the kingdom, is the story that Batson's research tells us about an inclination on the part of human beings. There is a worrisome tendency on the part of at least those about whom these stories are told. That is, ancient Greek civilizations seem to feel that this rings true. Contemporary American college students in Kansas seem to bear that out. When we think of ourselves as unobserved, it is difficult to act in conformity with moral codes. And the question which will reoccur throughout this semester, both in the unit on morality and in the unit on political philosophy, is the question of how society can be structured in such a way that there are the equivalent of eyes above our computers and mirrors in our rooms, so that we can act in keeping with rules that allow societies to provide the kind of stability that allows human beings to flourish. So we have a couple of minutes left, and let me just ask what questions you have about today's lecture. Silence. Question?
When you talk about the consequences of justice and morality, it's only been talked about as the consequences of what works for you. But is it a lot different when there are consequences somebody else might occur?
Good. So the question is, when I've talked about the consequences of morality, I've restricted discussion to consequences for you, things like your reputation. And the question is, what about other sorts of consequences? What about when acting in immoral ways brings harm to others? One of the things that we'll talk about next week, and again in the section on justice, is human beings' capacity for empathy and sympathy, and the ways in which those features might be leveraged to help do some of the pro-social work that mirrors and eyes do. So excellent question. So the question is, when Glaucon is talking about it, is he only talking about issues of reputation? So there's a very interesting thing going on in Book 2 of the Republic. Glaucon and Adeimantus are taking on a conversation that Socrates has been having with Thrasymachus in Book 1 about reputation. So that's part of why that's being invoked as a reason. But there are also, you'll hear, when Socrates gives his answer, it's about the integrity of the person who acts in moral or immoral ways. And what Socrates is basically going to go on to say is, it may seem to you like all you care about is what you appear to be to others. But as a matter of fact, when you let your soul get out of order, when you behave in ways that are impulsive, that are insensitive to the needs of others, you yourself will be unable to flourish. And that's the answer we're going to be exploring. Glaucon hasn't raised that as a question yet. Socrates is going to introduce it into the conversation. Good. It is 11:20. I hope that the density of today's lecture doesn't scare off too many of you. It gets more fun after this, and I look forward to seeing many of you next week. So today's lecture is a lecture about the...
Okay, no, what? I hope it gets fun.
So today's lecture is about the question ways. So Batson presents subjects with a very simple experimental scenario. People who participate in his experiments come into his laboratory and are told that their job is to decide which of two tasks they are assigned to and which of two tasks a second person, whom they won't be meeting, will be assigned to. One of the tasks is fun and interesting, and each correct answer that you give provides you with a lottery ticket for a lottery in which you'll win a certain amount of money. And the other task is described as kind of dull, and each correct answer that you give will not result in your being entered in a lottery. So people are told you can decide to assign yourself to the fun, interesting lottery chance task, and the other person to the boring, no lottery task. Or you can decide to assign the other person to the fun, interesting task and yourself to the boring, no lottery task. Now, what psychologists call the DV, or dependent variable, the thing with respect to which Batson is looking for differences, is the percentage of times people assign themselves to the positive task and the other person to the neutral task. So if we were just doing it by chance, if you were literally just flipping a coin, what percent of the time would the self-positive task be assigned? What percent of the time would the person assign themselves to the positive task, hold up the number of fingers times 10 such that it would be that percent of the time? You've got them on one hand, 50%. So if you were just merely flipping a coin, 50% of the time you would end up with the positive task, 50% of the time the other person would end up with the positive task. So that's one of the things that Batson is measuring in his studies. And the other thing that Batson is measuring in his studies is...
Yeah, I need to read on Batson. I think this is deceptively simple. This was interesting. Goodbye, YouTube. Yeah, life fucking sucks.